Hello, everybody. It's another Resto Terror podcast. We are currently at episode number 14, despite the fact that probably nobody but three people saw episode 13 for whatever reason. That video got pulled in a way that I cannot even begin to upload it. We're not sure exactly who it was that we offended or what the hell is going on with that. But so we're back today after a little bit of a hiatus and the post-holiday craziness, if not blues and everything, is that Delaine had some time off to travel with the family and have an awesome adventure in Florida.
Yeah, Disney World. And salutations, Adam.
Well, we're doing the Demolition Man wave now, wax on, wax off, because touching people is dirty. Like chickens are dirty. You can't find eggs anywhere. They cost $9 if you can for a carton. Like nobody seems to have any issue with the fact that you can't find eggs anywhere, and yet there's chicken meat all over the place. And yet somehow it has something to do with avian flu. It doesn't make a lick of sense, but yeah, man, it's been, I don't know, like a couple of weeks anyhow since we last casted.
Well, we put out the one with Geo before we went to Florida.
We did get that one, yeah.
And like Adam said, we did like an hour and 45-minute podcast. We still got it on Skype, trying to get it uploaded for those that are listening. Again, yeah, we did that the same day, and for some reason it wasn't able to come out. But going back to the Demolition Man thing, the reason why I wanted to salute that way, and Adam and I talked about this, is just one of those '90s movies that it just holds true to its character and true to the times, even to this day. And I mean, within its predictions, it just keeps coming true throughout everything. I mean, yes, Arnold didn't become the president, but he became a governor.
And that which they predicted. And so when Demolition Man came out, it was a joke. They were like, "Oh yeah, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he'll never be a politician." And then it was 10 years after Demolition Man that he actually did become the governor of California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the Taco Bell thing, until they had their Ebola scare. Remember back when we were in college?
Yeah.
They were on top of the world, dominating fast food. So as far as them being the number one restaurant at one time, they were. The whole how we were doing the salutations or be well is in reference to the recent pandemic, how we were to distance and, germs are bad and you have to wear a mask. That was basically the same concept of why they did that in Demolition Man, remember? So you can't touch each other because germs are bad. And then censorship.
So, like ghosting handshakes, listening to literal commercial jingles. I mean, the more music that I hear come out today, I don't even know who it is, if it's Nicki Minaj or fucking Cardi B, but there's this song, it's like some female rapper, and they are just singing about Dr. Pepper the whole time. Have you heard this song? Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper. And it's like, are you making a creative decision to be talking about this, or are you just getting paid money by, I think it's Pepsi and not Coca-Cola that owns Dr. Pepper? Like, what the fuck is going on? It's actually like in Demolition Man where people are singing along to commercial jingles and shit.
So, I don't know about that, but I mean, because I haven't heard it yet. Pepsi, though, they always associate Dr. Pepper to it, but I think it's its own organization with its own recipe. It's like uses some kind of prune juice or something in it, puree or something. But like I was saying, censorship is also in Demolition Man, which is coming more and more true. Where you get fined if you say a cuss word in public. Well, here on social media, there's certain things you can't even say or you get blocked, shadow banned, you have your videos pulled.
Yeah. And on that subject, after our last video just got completely shut down, like we've been shadow banned before, we'll see things start to slip in the metrics and the algorithms and everything, but this was just sight unseen. Something else happened with that other video to where trying to upload it is just like not possible. And it maybe kind of ties into what I was showing you earlier, is that I just wanted to make a fun graphic. We were having a conversation about Blazing Saddles and about how important that is as a time capsule, because as a time capsule, it's almost like the ultimate nuclear warfare against wokeism, right? But you have to understand that it worked in the time that it was because people were more open to maybe ridiculing their heritage or their credence or creed or whatever. Like, but today everybody is trying to screech it down, and I think that's ridiculous. Is that, like you and I have talked about, is that Blazing Saddles is important because it's a question of, I totally just lost my fucking train of thought.
Well, it's the perfect allegory of racism, I guess, and making fun of it.
Isn't the joke. That was the point I was going to make, is that in Blazing Saddles, racism isn't the joke. It's the idiocy of racists that is funny. And that's the problem that we have today, is that you get these screeching blue hairs and everything trying to shout people down. It's fun to punch Nazis. It's fun to, like physically abuse racist people. And it's like, okay, so you're observing somebody that operates out of hatred. Why are you going to give them that back? Because it's like what a fucking homeboy that wrote all of the good old stories, fucking whatever his name is, says something along the lines of like, don't ever approach an idiot because they will bring you down to their level and beat you with experience. And so the idea is that, like, is racism fucked up? Yeah, it is, which is exactly why Mel Brooks had a black man portraying the hilarity of the idiocy of racism instead of just being like, you have to use the proper pronouns and everything. It's like, why are you going to get malicious about this? Like, the idea of trying to engage with somebody that is already apparently radicalized and violent potentially themselves, you laugh them down. That's the solution. You laugh about it.
So, I mean, I was telling you, Adam, it's the basis and foundation for the type of humor Seth MacFarlane does. Make fun of everyone and everything to the point where it's equal opportunity prejudice. So no one can claim that they're being segregated or they're being frowned upon in any way, because it's everyone. And it's beyond that. So the point we were making with it is, aside from the racism, the point of it is that, yes, it's a super racist film in a lot of ways, but the way that he counteracts the racism in ways that mock them and they don't even realize that it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does it in a way that he's not being aggressive.
And that's what's funny, is that the racists have already lost. Like, if you're racist, sorry, bro, like, you already fucking lost. And that's the hilarity of it. Like, you don't get to not contribute to society and social contracts. But the fact that, like, if you are a racist, then you're already ejected from polite society. And it's like, we're going to find some use out of you. We might as well laugh about it. It's fucking hilarious. Like, are you out of your mind? Like, it's hilarious. I kind of got carried away when I was talking about how it tied into whatever the fuck it was. Let me just pull this up in terms of how we got shadow banned and everything. And this really fucking creeps me out. We'll get back into Blazing Saddles and everything because there's a lot more to unpack there. But this shit creeps me out. So our graphic that we use is something like, where did you get that graphic, Delaine? Like the alien and your face being all animated and everything, and where I just slap mine in there?
I can't remember what it's called because I don't have it anymore, but it's some kind of photo editor that had a bunch of different filters, but the filters do go with the pictures. That's why the alien kind of resembles my face, and then
right.
It has my smile.
Well, and also
it kind of has the mustache.
It was a decently simple way for us to create a graphic, and I think that it perfectly speaks to our podcast. It definitely like shares our energy. I actually tried editing it to where it isn't just so sloppily me with my face stamped on there and sideways. But yeah, like, you could clearly see that the alien face mimics yours. And this was an app that you had that I have never, ever had. The app that I do have is Pixlr, which I believe to be Autodesk, or if not Adobe. And so while we were talking about Blazing Saddles, I just wanted to make like a quick, fun, goofy graphic or whatever. Am I screen sharing right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you saw the previous one where it mimicked your face, and obviously, like, it's a very small window to be able to see the lips. but it's no longer smiling. So how is it that that alien graphic was able to change itself despite the fact that it was like emailed to me, texted to me, downloaded onto my phone, used in a different photo altering application, and then it still has the ability to do that? Like, there's so many implications with this fucking problem right here, is that we all realize, like, you and I often have conversations, is that it's important to understand the esoteric, because if you don't, there are those that will apply it upon you in a way that you will not be aware of. Like, anybody will tell you, I keep seeing this meme go around where it's like, oh, if you ever feel bad about yourself, you have to understand that some people talk to crystals. And it's like, well, have you ever tried smoking crack? Like, that's a fucking crystal. And it's like, I ain't saying that we talk to them, but do we factor them in via practices into our lives? Yeah. But ultimately, it's important to realize that all of the oligarchs, every single one of them, do exactly this kind of a thing, is that they will have modus operandi that they could implicate over generations. So for decades, they will await the arrival of, say, like a Libra or a Scorpio in a particular solar celestial pattern, because that means that there will be fortuitousness in those corridors of that chapter. I'm not saying that I validify any of this, but what I am saying is that, do I believe in it? I wouldn't say I believe in it. I have a lot of fun with it and I like it a lot, but there's a difference between me believing in it and just thinking that it's something that is useful to apply in your day to day or your week to week or your month to month and your year to year. Yeah.
So I think that ties into our AI episode that I wish that wouldn't got deleted. Also, so talking about censorship, this is our first video as esoteric, because I got a video banned being a guest on the Gentleman's Bureau, but first one as esoteric, we got it banned. It was our AI episode, and so in it, and I guess I could say because it relates to now, with the algorithms, I guess that's written into the picture, encoded into the picture, right? And algorithms basically being a form of a dumber AI, okay? It's not exactly thinking with the consciousness. It's programmed to do what it's supposed to do, okay?
Right.
So
it is prompts. Like prompts. Prompts, you could have enough prompts to make a thing look intelligent, but it isn't actually thinking, right? Like it just has enough prompts to make you feel like you're interacting with a person.
But we are going to get there. We're going to get to AI and cyborgs. And so the great Rosicrucian teacher, Rudolf Steiner, he said that this is like the age of Ahriman, the perfect age of Ahriman. So going to the Kabbalistic tree of life and talking about the Luciferic and Ahrimanic paths, okay, and Ahriman being the Zoroastrian demonic entity that influences us in negative ways and feeds off of us. He wants to disconnect us from our higher spiritual centers. And in doing that, it will keep us asleep so that we're able to be fed on. So with AI, that's like his perfect harvest ground, because especially if you put a chip in your brain or we allow AI to have any kind of control over us in any way, that's the perfect way for Ahrimanic entities to just cut you off from your higher spiritual centers, and you would have no way of reaching it, no way of even knowing it was there anymore.
Which is kind of where I've been for the past couple of weeks, probably since the last time we podcasted, is that I understand the importance of being an adept, an initiate, being somebody in a practice of a way. Whereas me, I just expose myself to opportunities and information. And I find, like, within morality is that, yes, Christ is good, God is like lovely. But to invoke that ideology and kind of, like say that, well, it's them that has my back. Like, I don't know if that's true. I think that the entire point of existence is that we are going to we're going to live it, and we don't have a safety net. Like it is that question of faith, is that faith is beyond the idea of a safety net. And so I think for a lot of people out there, it's certainly recently, which I've been experiencing, is that a lot of people are trying to come into these practices as though they're coming in out of the cold. They want to feel someplace safe. They want to feel as though, well, I have the secret handshake, I have the secret hat, I have the secret decoder ring, and that makes me okay despite what comes. And ultimately, it's like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with following any ideology or whatsoever. I think that a lot of people right now are very scared in a lot of different regards, but ultimately, like, you're doing it right now. You're doing it all along, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're baptized or you're taking the soup or you were dunked in the frozen neva as they do in Russia and Tibet. It's just, it is what it is, and this is what we are here for.
So as far as that goes, I guess the better way to say it, and this is actually in the Rosicrucian teaching. That's why it has a lot of different beliefs intertwined into it, right? Belief systems, and it's not a religion. It's more of a way of philosophy, okay? And in that, they say that dogmas are falling into a dogma allows you to be closed-minded. It cuts you off from the world. It cuts you off from ideas, because then you believe this to be the absolute truth when no one knows that this is or isn't. And when you do that, then you're not open to any new ideas. You're not open to any opinions. And in fact, it turns people, in some cases, to zealots, angry people who get aggressive and violent when you say anything that doesn't coincide with their own beliefs. And I just want to talk about this as a personal thing for me, and I want to put this out here for people of the faith or anyone who's a pastor or teaching anybody about the faith. Something that just made me question a lot about how I felt. And I guess this is why I started opening doors and I started going down other paths that led me to the route that I'm on right now, and becoming more open to other ideas and occult and esoteric things. Is that I had a friend, and I'm not going to say names, and this friend transitioned from a male to a female. And, at first I wanted to say something that I supported that and that I was happy for them if that's what made them happy, which is what I ended up telling them after, praying on it and thinking about it. But what I was told while going to the church and doing these things and going 5 days a week was that I should tell that person that they're going to burn in hell and that God's not going to forgive them and what they did is wrong. And so that, for me, in my heart, okay, if it's so good, if something is good and it's good for you, it shouldn't make you feel that bad, no matter what the case is. And instance, if I may say, as far as what this instance goes, is that you're judging, right? And the scripture tells you not to judge others. And before you point out the splinter in someone's eye, you're to look at the stump in your own. And that's saying that we have our own sins that we have to worry about, our own things that we have to better ourselves in. And telling people that they're going to go to hell or anything, that's you calling judgment on them. And we have no right or authority to it. And again, you can be friends with people. You can have conversations and like people, but not have to support things that they do. I always used to say, because I learned this from the pastor, which you hate the sin, not the sinner. Okay. Just because you may disagree with the person's lifestyle because that's not your own, because, like, for instance, I'm straight. So it's not that I don't think people shouldn't have gay relationships, bisexual relationships or anything. I feel that's up to the person whose perspective it is and what makes you feel good. As far as I'm concerned, it's what I mean by that is just because I don't 100% agree with it, that I'm like, oh yeah, that's what all of us should do. That's what I should do. I agree you should do whatever you want and what makes you feel right. And I'm not going to judge you for it. And I will still be your friend. I will still be whatever. I mean, to me, it makes no difference. And that's what I mean by that. You shouldn't judge a person. So when in the faith, because a lot of them are against abortion, they're against homosexuality, things of that nature, they become very hateful towards people of that choice or that lifestyle. You know what I mean? And I mean, we've all seen it in TV, movies, everything. They've shown how people will hate on a person for their homosexuality, their bisexuality, whatever their sexual orientation is, because it doesn't coincide with what the scripture says.
And it's amazing is the way that what you're doing is you're fleshing out exactly the narrative that we have incorporated around these ideologies. And so that's the one side of it where it's very conservative and very religious and very alt-right or fundamentalist or whatever. But, you know, what's the epitome of irony for me, knowing many, many trans people, like living in Denver, you can't shake a dead cat at somebody that ain't fucking trans or trans supportive. But it's ironic and also a little bit heartbreaking is that my argument always is that I just don't really understand whatever went wrong with drag. I think that drag was perfectly acceptable and it was a lot of fun. Like, you know me, you'll catch me at a gay bar every now and again, and I'll have the time of my life. I love the culture. I love the atmosphere. I love the camaraderie. Is that they're very welcoming. And yeah, granted, a lot of them want to fuck me and they want to convert me because they get that. They basically hang my head on the wall like I was a fucking animal that they hunted or something. But even that, like, I'm an old-fashioned girl, and you got to buy a girl a drink and give her a dance. You ain't never meeting the parents, and I'm just not going to do anything with you until you do those three things. But I love the fact that they are confrontational and that they do really get in your face, and it's like, oh my God, you're such a good-looking motherfucker, and it's like, oh my God, like, I've never felt so seen. I've never felt so pretty. It's just that I cry when I poop too big, and I can't imagine a person up there, and like the whole thing kind of grosses me out. However, nothing with the whole drag concept or whatever. It's like the thing on the other side of the argument that no trans person would ever be able to recognize, that is the way that I foresee it, is that I am completely supportive of trans. I just wish that they didn't go the way of like wholesale, like genital or body mutilation, because that's what it actually comes down to. Whereas just wear the fake tits and a nice dress and you could do drag. Like, it's not that fucking deep. There's no reason that you need to cut your organs off and lose all sensitivity and create like a meat sleeve that, I mean, if you're inclined the way that you want to feel filled, I understand that. But at the same time, like, you just completely removed like a part of basically a brain. Like, there are so many nerve centers and sexual organs, and you just cut all of that out and turned it into a sock made out of like meat casing or whatever. And the thing that nobody in the trans community would ever admit, that is kind of heartbreaking to me, but also very true, is that it's like, well, you couldn't not transition. This is your lot in life. Like, this is who you are. Like, we know men that are effeminate. They incline towards the effeminate energy. They do so in a varying degrees, right? Like, you have the outspoken Karen kind of a gay man, you have the sweet motherly gay man, you have the diva gay man more often than not. And the same with women, is that you have women that are very masculine and they are very butch, they are very blue collar, they are very much in charge of the relationship or whatever. The thing that none of them would ever really speak to or acknowledge is that my argument is that it's like, well, when you transition, that is your pathos and your passage to feeling closer to God. Like, it makes you a better person because it makes you happier, because you feel more fulfilled. You feel more in place of what it is that you aspired to. And that's just not a part of the narrative whatsoever, is that everybody is getting sold wholesale the idea of transitioning, and they never even stop to think, like, at the end of the day, like, who wouldn't want a nice pair of tits, bro? Like, I'd get a fucking nice pair of tits today if I had the opportunity, knew a surgeon, and had the money to do so. But it's a different argument between just having a nice thing and this is who you actually are. And so I like where technology is going in terms of hormone replacement and hormone therapy and surgical alteration or whatever. I just think that it's very few and far between that these people actually realize, like, this is who I actually am. Like, I actually am a man in a woman's body or vice versa. And so I'm going to resolve that. I don't know if it's anybody's right to make that decision. But if they do, then at the end of the day, like, I am absolutely all for it, because that means that you are more complete, you are more whole, you are more comfortable, and you're better for everybody else. You're better for yourself. And that's all that it really comes down to.
So, I mean, if I may say, and Adam, you and I, we grew up in this era. So I think it's great that people are able to be more open about the way that they are, their belief system, their sexuality. And, you know, because from the time we came from, and the kids, they don't believe it when I say it. And of course they wouldn't, because they're growing up in this era that's becoming more supportive of these things, even though we're not 100% there, which is why we wanted to talk about Blazing Saddles and this subject here, is that these things haven't reached a level of polarity where we've reached a balance. It's still, it falters. And when we were growing up, if you said you were gay, anything of that nature, you were going to get beat to death. You were probably strung up on a fence. I mean, a lot of bad things would happen to you. And so in that aspect, you know, I am glad that the world is changing in the way that people can come out and say things and be more open about it, even though we're not 100% there. I mean, it's good that we started losing the violence over it, which is why I was talking about, you know, becoming more of a zealot when it comes to your faith, or in teaching people to hate people that are like that. I mean, if you have to teach hate to anybody for any reason, then I mean, what good is that belief system to begin with? You know what I mean?
Well, and so our generation was certainly unique, like especially in the late 80s, early 90s, is that there very much was like a propaganda campaign against anything homosexual. Everything gay was bad. Like, oh, you did something wrong in school, like, oh, you're gay. Like, oh, you are kind of downtrodden and outside of the norm or whatever. Oh, you're gay. Like, gayness was associated with the utmost negativity, but it's like human beings don't have the capacity to not think. It's like when you say like, hey, don't think about a white elephant. Well, the second I say don't think about it, you're going to start thinking about a white elephant. And it was the same thing culturally that was imposed upon us, is that literally everybody was going around controlling each other and inducing each other into this conundrum, into this inescapable pathos of saying like, are you gay? And our entire generation of men grew up like, I don't know. And how am I going to know? Like, am I going to let a guy suck my dick? And like, then I figure out that I just wasn't into it or whatever, which actually happened to me. And I thank the motherfucker that did so when I was passed out drunk, because I had the opportunity to know that I wasn't, whereas literally everybody else doesn't have that opportunity. It's an insolvable problem. I think what's happening today in terms of how, you know, like when you're saying that you would get dragged to death behind a truck or whatever, these things were very real. It was very much a situation. And I've made the argument previously that throughout all of human culture, we've always had homosexuality. And if you look back at, you know, black and white movies from the 30s through the 50s or whatever, you always see like, oh yeah, he's a fadoik, he's a fancy boy, he's a pretty boy, whatever. But it stopped and ended there. Like they'd say just as many epithets towards the Irish or the Italian or the blacks or the Jews or whatever. But it changed around the advent of the AIDS epidemic. And I honestly level Anthony Fauci as being responsible for that because of the way that he managed the social cues associated around the AIDS epidemic, is that suddenly it just wasn't enough. It's that like, yeah, you like to, you know, suck a dick or you like one up your ass or whatever, like that's fine. Like if it does it for you, it doesn't for me. But if it does it for you, then Godspeed. But
Same
with
thing
the
with
advent of
monkeypox.
HIV is that it really did become almost like this cultural thing that it hyper invested the right and the religious and the what do you call them, like the religious fanatics, is that they were saying, oh, you see, like thou shalt not lie with a man as you do a woman or otherwise you get HIV. And it's like, well, no, that's the same argument that they did about Jews and tuberculosis that led to fucking concentration camps. What we're doing today is that whereas our generation was one of intolerance from the right, yeah, like it was the right that was telling us that video games lead to violence, violent rap leads to violence. And now today we know that it was all like deep state agendas that created the rap that we listen to today to perpetuate that violence. But that's a whole other fucking conversation right there, is that now they're raising kids in public institutions like public school or otherwise, and they're telling them like kids are actually ostracized if they don't have pronouns or if they don't identify as a furry or something. Like, you are completely ostracized and cast out from supposedly polite society if you don't identify as anything other than, say, just heterosexual. Like, I'm a boy. You say you're a boy, that's a sure way to get your fucking neck cut. And so it's almost like the same process of occlusion and cruelty just shifted from one side of the coin to the other. Whereas you were arguing everything that was correct as to the conservative and the right and the hyper-religious of saying that this is a bad thing. Well, now it's the opposite coming from the left and saying, like, you do need to sit down and shut up because you're a 6-year-old white boy. And so you are the patriarch, and you're exactly all the problem. And so you're going to go through school from kindergarten till senior year high school and then into college. And the entire time they're going to tell you that it's your fucking fault. It's a 6-year-old kid. Like,
so I wonder if you could bring up that video about the Orwellian nightmare. I mean, I really think this ties into a lot of the conversation where we're trying to bring this around. And I mean, not saying full circle like as if we're ending the podcast, but full circle as far as what we're talking about with your sexual orientation, with your color of your skin, with, you know, your work, with everything, how the banks judge you, how credit systems judge you.
That's all that really comes down to. What are you going to do about the color of your skin? Like, we've seen like transracials before. How many years ago was it that there was that Jewish woman who like dark tanned herself with all kinds of artificial products and was actually identifying as a black woman? That was like a test control, and it didn't go over well at all. But had it gone over well culturally, then probably today we wouldn't be talking about transsexualism. We would be talking about transracialism. I've been seeing that shit prop up again and again recently, where you have like it's always white men or women, but there's this white boy who identifies as Korean. And it's like, no, dude, because you have to take the bad with the good. Like, you don't understand. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, we've also recently started getting into trans ageism. Have you seen that? Where like 40-year-olds identify as 6-year-olds? It's gaining traction. Like, it's actually a thing that people are like emotionally investing in. And why not? Because if you were able to be transsexual, then why wouldn't you be able to be trans racist or trans ageist? You know, like, where's the line drawn? There is no line. It is progressivism. Everybody talks about progressivism like it's a good, holy thing. But where else do you hear the term progressive? I'd say in a cancer diagnosis. Just because you use the word doesn't mean that it's a good thing.
That's why I like the 7 Hermetic Principles, dude. Like, there's a reason why mentalism's number 1 on that list, because the way that you view the world, your perspective, because everyone's perspective is different, is essentially your own prison, which you're developing. It's either your own prison or your own spiritual enlightenment.
Your own prison or your own prism?
No, I said your own. Well,
and pillows. Prism.
Yep, that's perfect reference. But I mean, so we choose our paths in a lot of ways. So that's why I wanted you to share that Orwellian nightmare, which also goes along with what I just said right now, is that we're choosing the prison.
Yeah, we are. And it's a colorful kaleidoscope, technicolor fucking prison. But with each passing day, it becomes clearer and clearer. Like I was talking about in my rant earlier about eggs. And they're telling us like, well, it's for your own good. We have to get rid of the eggs because of avian flu. And it's like, I don't understand why the egg is more susceptible to avian flu. And yet there's no shortage of chicken meat. What the fuck are we talking about here, right? Like, eggs are the backbone, the breadbasket of basically all wholesome, healthy living that we can do. It's like complex proteins that come in a neat little fucking package like an egg that you just crack open and make easily, and it's readily available. Like chickens make an egg a day, and yet that's the thing that they're telling us that they have an issue with. Oh, but they could kill the chickens, and there's no risk of fucking avian flu there.
So, I want to bring this up on the podcast because I haven't got to address it here with the audience, but I know I talked to you about it, Adam. But being in Florida and watching the news because the stuff going on with the airlines and stuff, and plus I wanted to see what the weather was going to be like daily and what it was going to be like coming back. I seen things on the news that just blew me away. So one thing I talked to you about was the fishing hole they were talking about, and all the fish there died, every single one. And they were saying how they couldn't figure it out, but they're thinking it was something in the water. Then about 2 days later, there's something else on the news, and they were talking about these sea elephants and how all of them died and washed up on this beach, but only one survived. And I was like, whoa, what the hell is going on here? You know what I mean?
Like Alaska, you heard the story out of Alaska is that all of the crabs disappeared. You're talking like 80 billion metric tons of crab, one of the most prolific species in the ocean, just like gone. And nobody has any fucking clue. It's like, what the fuck are we talking about here? What is this?
Yeah, so I mean, there's something definitely going on in the world with the ecosystems, with animals, and I mean, my conspiracy theory side wants to say, you know, that they're intentionally doing this to create the shortages that they wanted to predict.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just like feel when the weather is going to be severe, they're creating that, especially like global warming and stuff. When they want to push that idea, then they use their weather control technology and start to cause more shit happening. So talking about that, there was actually a test done, and these guys, they used vibration, and two vibrations, I can't remember if it was opposite or on opposite ends of the polarity or what it was, but they literally created a mini hurricane in the ocean waters, okay, by using vibration to make the air move. And so that just proves right there you can do all kinds of things to control the weather. I mean, we've been salting clouds since the 1900s, early 1900s.
So this is the thought experiment that I recently came across, and every now and again you get something that really just like bursts your bubble, like you have the light bulb and then suddenly it's like blink. And it was the idea of where everybody, the second that you bring up chemtrails, and everybody is like, oh yeah, it's like sodium oxide or aluminum magnetite or whatever the fuck. And it's like, well, whoever's in control of that, why would they harm themselves? And it's like, yeah, okay, that's a decent realm of thought or whatever. And so when you see contrails in the sky, chemtrails, contrails, whatever the fuck, they're like, yeah, it's just water particulate that does that. And it's like, okay, is that not in itself climate control? Like the very idea that even if it is just water vapor, does that not also reflect sunlight and change the climate?
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, so we don't even really need to discuss exactly what it is in them, like, because you'll have conspiracy theorists that say that, oh no, it's aluminum oxide, and then you have others that say no, it's magnesium nitrate, and then those two will literally kill each other in the fucking streets. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like even the non-conspiracy theorists that are like, oh, it's just simple water vapor or whatever, it's like that reflects the sun, so it's the same thing.
So I guess to argue the point, why would they hurt themselves? And this is theoretical, but I'm going to tie this into something else I wanted to talk about on this episode, which is biogeometry. So I'm going to start out by talking about King Tut's tomb, Tutankhamun's tomb. So when that tomb was open, almost everybody who was there died shortly after, right? And they say it was the curse of Tutankhamun. And then there was this whole thing about how pharaohs' tombs had curses in it. If you opened it or you did things in a wrong way, you could possibly die. One person on that team did not die, and he was wearing an amulet that came from another older Egyptian tomb. And it was like a wristband or something. And This trinket is like what the pharaohs would wear, and it's said because these are vibrational spiritual centers that are healing centers, the pyramids, the temples, um, that when they wore these bracelets, it would counteract those energies that were programmed into the temples. So it's Dr. Robert Gilbert is talking about it in his biogeometry lecture. And Dr. Ibrahim Karim is the one who founded modern biogeometry the way that we understand it today. It's really only taught out of Egypt. Dr. Robert Gilbert's the first person outside of Egypt allowed to teach it, but because he was coming up with so many unique ideas with it, he was putting together these organized plans of it. And Dr. Abraham Karim had invited him to be a teacher of biogeometry. And so he's saying that in the tombs, they puncture a hole on the other side of the tomb and they put a wooden doll. And with that, and with the processes of mummification and their ceremonies that they do, they're able to treat the body in such a way and our spiritual centers inside of us, so our chakras, so that they emit this BG3 energy, which is biogeometry 3 energy. And BG3 energy it's a negative green light. And I'm no specialist on biogeometry. I'm definitely trying to learn and school myself on it. And I want to get some of the pendulums that measure it. So, I mean, going back to this, I guess you need a little bit more background on it, is that there's the at Karnak, isn't it, where it's Thoth, Tehuti, Jehudi is holding the net, and they call it Thoth, the master of the net, okay, because it said that he gave them everything in their belief system of everything they knew, math, science, spirituality. And so what the net is a reference to, and it's not really talked about in the science community, is it's a background net that exists in this earth. And they're the radioactive energy lines of the earth. And these lines, people like mental dowsers from the French who discovered actually the negative green energy, they were able to measure it with radioactive tools. They could measure the radiation coming off of it. So they built this grid, and under it are 2 initiates holding nets like this under the hieroglyph, excuse me, excuse me, of Thoth holding the net. They're holding the nets because they're casting the nets out into the universe. Well, the reference to it is that the nets are the universe. They're everything we know within this 3-dimensional and space-time.
And isn't it interesting that we use the same verbatim and the same etymology of the net as the web, the World Wide Web, the net, right? Like, and so I don't know, like something about everything you were just saying. I've studied Egyptology under like professionals, like real Egyptologists here in Denver. One of the most foremost Egyptologists in the land was a professor that I studied under at Metro, and they always look at it so 2-dimensionally, and they'll look at the hieroglyphs and be like, oh, you see the way they drew people? That's because they were ignorant. And that's like, no. They knew enough that it was just a style. Like if you saw an Egon Schiele or a Hieronymus Bosch or a fucking Mickey Mouse, you would think like, oh yeah, those they had no idea what they were doing. And it's like, well, we also created the entire film industry to project Mickey Mouse and people's whatever. Like, but what you were talking about really resonated with me in terms of mummification, is that you can't fuck with the Egyptians or the Memets as to how it was that they preserved the physical form. But the foremost thing they always spoke of is the book of life and the book of death. So we have evidence of what they did with the physical bodies, but don't you suppose that they were even better about the energetic spirit, right? Like, and when you're talking about how today, French scientists or whatever are able to register like radioactive particulate or whatever, those are just words that we use. What is actually radiation? Well, if you wanted to get creative or poetic, you could say that radiation is kind of like the pulse and the heartbeat of the all, of God, of Shiva, of whatever your religious proclivity. But ultimately you're talking about the universe. Like these are the energies, the universal, the stellar energies that we are incorporated with. And it seems that they had a different, definition between the Ka. Is it Ba? Ka and Ba.
Yeah.
Ka is the spirit and Ba is the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
So radiation to the Egyptians might have just been Ka, right? Like we all have our own radiation in a way.
So actually what they're measuring is a form of the BG3 radiation. And so like you were saying, is that the BG3 radiation is source vibration. It's God, whatever you want to call it. And we all resonate with it. And this is how they balanced each other. This is why I call their temples and pyramids spiritual centers and healing centers. And so when going back to what I was saying about Tutankhamun's tomb, is that there's a hole on the other side of the pharaoh. And in that hole, due to what they do through the ceremony and the mummification process, they activate these BG3 energies to where they resonate to the surface easier, right? Because this has to happen in death. We have to pour out of this body to pass on to the next of our ethereal time. So in doing this, they're able to harness some of that BG3 energy and transport it into that doll. And by doing that, that energy is still conscious enough to set the trap within the room that if things are tampered with in ways that are a negative way, this energy is activated in a negative way against the person. Now, these people who were attacked by this energy, because it's the negative energy to the green energy, which is life, it begins to break down their body and their cells in a way that can't be explained unless you are highly schooled in Taoist medicine or Hinduism. Shamans can diagnose that. They can see what's going on with your energies. A doctor can't. And so I believe this to be the reason why these people died in ways that they said were unexplained when they opened the tomb. But again, this guy was wearing an amulet that counteracts those energies, because obviously when the pharaohs are alive, they're being shown what their burial chambers and things like that are going to look like. They are putting these energies in there already. So in order to be around those energies, you have to have some kind of talisman that negates those energies. And when I say that, so going back to the net and hieroglyphs, the reason why figures are distorted in the hieroglyphs is because they're built on this net, and they use the Earth's radiation lines to build them. And that's why the hieroglyphs actually give an energy like a living force. They actually have chakras and things that we can interact with. And so there are hieroglyphs in the temple walls, in the caves and stuff, that Dr. Ibrahim Karim has documented, and they took a chisel and they broke it in the middle, because what it does is it breaks those lines and neutralizes that energy. So say, for instance, they're going to carve something else to harness the energies for another purpose in another part of the temple. And these other energies that are active are going to interfere with it, because you have lines cross-secting a vibration all through our reality from different angles, each vibration representing a different color and emotion, which affects our polarity, our mental thoughts, our physical body, our spiritual soul, I guess. And so the Egyptians, they wrote this code and they were able to use it. So when I say this, they had schools where they don't just have eye doctors. You have a right eye doctor and you have a left eye doctor, because they worked on everything in a polarity to find balance.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about how, and I just wanted to pull up images of the hieroglyphics, like what we were talking about. What do you suppose the repetition of the baboon is? That's kind of incredible to me, is that you could see Osiris here, and then probably Isis, I suppose, or no, Isis probably has like the fancy headdress. And then you have these other two Changos over here, and you could see kind of like a burial process that's occurring and everything. And so we see this today, and they're like, oh, look at how ignorant their art was or whatever. And it's like, well, I mean, it might have just been their artistic flair. And the fact is that, when they say, well, back in Egyptian days, people were what, 6 heads tall, and today we are 7 heads tall. But they illustrated that we probably wouldn't have an understanding or a language for that were it not looking back at Egyptian art or whatever. And so it's like, were they really that ignorant? Were they really that little advances that when you talk about Egypt and about how they were able to utilize all of these forms like biogeometry, um, it sort of smacks like all that I couldn't help but think about was that in Finnish, you have like 36 words for snow, and they describe all of the different types of snow and everything. But here in English, like we have 36,000 different definitions of heartbreak, right? Like, oh, you're on the spectrum of autism. Oh, you're ADD. Oh, you're ADHD. Oh, you're this acronym or that acronym, or you're what's the big one that they level at everybody today is Asperger's. Oh, you have Asperger's, and it's like, well, really all you're doing is like to finish up 36 different words for snow. You're doing the same thing for heartbreak or spiritual upheaval or upset, right? But because of the way that the language is that you're going to have to topically resolve that problem with a band-aid of a pill that really is just like either opiates or barbiturates or what the fuck ever. It's gonna fuck you up. Like it seems like the Egyptians were speaking towards a narrative to where it's like we know not only what this is, but also how to send it down the River Nile into the land of reeds and whatever, plentiful. You got to go past the scales first to weigh your heart against a feather, but
Well, I want to talk about the pyramid, going back to it, BG3 energy is the shape of the pyramid. Okay, again, like I was telling you, you have these symbols. So, and when you were bringing up the hieroglyphics just a minute ago, and it's funny, we were looking at Osiris because there's hieroglyphics of him interacting with the netters. And what's happening is there's the netters holding a pharaoh or Osiris in many different hieroglyphs, and they have like an ankh with 2 little spikes coming out of it and they're holding it towards the nose. Because in the sinus, we have it's connected to our BG3 energy, and it's the sinus and your heart were the pulse counters for this BG3 energy and the balance of it. And that's why when you said that about the feather, right? The Egyptians believed that at the end of your life, you weigh your heart before Anubis, and if your heart is light as a feather, then you're going to pass on into the afterlife. If not, then you lived a life of regret. And that's the way we're taught. I don't believe it's that case because in this instance of biogeometry and their belief system that the heart is the pulse counter to your polarity, to your health, to your spirituality. And things like the radiation lines of the earth or negative energies from other people, all these other outside influences, they affect the polarity of that. And so I believe by not having your heart balanced
radiation
lines. Yep.
Thanks.
And so not balancing the heart is what they were talking about. So again, they have these things that they're putting up to the nose to activate this BG3 energy within them, which gives like a glowing gold aura emanating from a person. So they believe like when the saints or them that they're painted with these gold auras around their head, that was symbolic of them emanating with this BG3 energy, which is resonating with the source vibration, the all.
I did that a time or two on a couple of coke benders in college, did we not?
Yeah.
Like I saw this aura around your head and I was like, bro. Maybe you could back this up. This is something that I had always heard, is that the Egyptian ideology was at the center of thought and thinking, like, and I'm even pointing to my head, which is interesting, is that they thought that the brain was waste material. Maybe this is just like the way that I was propagandized to understand it, but I had always heard that the Egyptians viewed the heart as the center of thought and action and decisiveness, right? And so I always thought about that. I heard it since I was young, and I thought like, well, like when you receive a download and you have like a lot of ideas that are just coursing through your head and then you have a migraine or whatever, it's like, does that mean that the Egyptians, if you think that your heart is the center of thought, then is that's how it would be. Like if you actually experience the concept of thought emanating from here as opposed to here, then even if it does come from here, you would trick yourself into thinking it does come from here. And so does that mean like when they overthought, did they suffer heartache? I don't know if you've ever heard that before. It's something that has always like kind of interested me, is that they actually seem to have thought of the heart as the center of like concept and thought.
So here's what I kind of believe, through what I'm starting to study and what I like, I guess, come across, is that the heart is associated more to this body. Okay, our physical form existing here, the energies that produce to keep us alive, and
the keystone of the body.
Yeah. This is just the receiver for the spirit to manipulate this body and give it the energy, right? And so when the Rosicrucians talk about tying the heart to the third eye chakra, I mean, because you're making this into one thought process, you're connecting these two as a brain so that you can perceive from the cave of Brahma with your pineal gland, with your third eye, and a world that's illuminated by the light of the heart.
Are you on Wi-Fi right now?
Yeah.
You should get off the Wi-Fi. You're getting kind of grainy. Yeah, and in the meantime, I'll throw on that My Dinner with Andre. Oh, wait a second.
Oh, yeah.
We got carried away before getting into it, but I'll throw it on now. This is basically everything. Come on. I don't know how to technology. Just reload it. Am I screen sharing?
Yeah.
The world now may very well be a self-perpetuating, unconscious form of brainwashing created by a world totalitarian government based on money, and that all of this is much more dangerous than one thinks. And it's not just a question of individual survival, Wally, but that somebody who's bored is asleep, and somebody who's asleep will not say no. See, I keep meeting these people. I mean, just a few days ago, I met this man whom I greatly admire. He's a Swedish physicist, Gustav Bjornstrand, and he told me that he no longer watches television, he doesn't read newspapers, and he doesn't read magazines. He's completely cut them out of his life because he really does feel that we're living in some kind of Orwellian nightmare now, and that everything that you hear now contributes to turning you into a robot. He said to me, "Where are you from?" And I said, "New York." He said, "New York, yes, that's a very interesting place. Do you know a lot of New Yorkers who keep talking about the fact that they want to leave but never do?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why do you think they don't leave?" I gave him different banal theories. He said, "Oh, I don't think it's that way at all." He said, "I think that New York is the new model for the new concentration camp, where the camp has been built by the inmates themselves, and the inmates are the guards, and they have this pride in this thing they've built. They've built their own prison, and so they exist in a state of schizophrenia, where they are both guards and prisoners, and as a result, they no longer have, having been lobotomized, the capacity to leave the prison they've made, or to even see it as a prison." Has it ever occurred to you, Wally, that the process that...
So that's really interesting, is that when we're talking... Oh, sorry, I got to stop screen sharing here. Doop-de-doo. It's really interesting.
About
what's up?
Choosing your own prison. Choosing your own prison. When I said that, that's why I wanted you to play that.
Yeah, and it like is very much a nosebleed, is that I'd seen My Dinner with Andre back when I was a kid, and I was like, does anybody else see what I'm seeing? And I'd go around in grade school and kids would be like, the fuck are you talking about? Are you Thundercats or Ninja Turtles? And it's like, on My Dinner with Andre, why the fuck did my parents show me such a thing? And it's like, does nobody else get it? But it's interesting because when we're talking about the structures of, say, Egypt, Mehmet, right?
Kemet.
Nemet.
No, Kemet.
Kemet. Is that you see an over assemblage of, and like you were saying, is that the bio geo whatever.
So the BG3 energy. Actually, and it's funny you're doing that, the triangle, because the triangle, so when I talked about shapes resonating with colors and resonating with an energy, the triangle is the representation of BG3 energy. And that's why they built the pyramids. And so they're harnessing this BG3 energy, which we were talking about. Instead of having 4 sides to the pyramid, It's 8 because each wall has an indent so slight you can only see it from an aerial view. Now with this and the king's chamber being 6 degrees from the center and 15 minutes from the center, okay, 6 degrees off from the center, 15 minutes up, when this energy that they're using the pyramid as a basic antenna. So with it being the shape of a triangle, it resonates in the lower astral planes. And by putting these indentures into it, it cleans up the energy being projected from it and also helps the pyramid resonate in the higher astral planes. So now you go to the king's chamber, which is offset. It uses the neon green BG3 energy line. In a way, it finds a sweet spot that maximizes the potential energy of the BG3 energy. And that's why Rosicrucians and Freemasons and other organizations talk about how they use chambers like that for initiation processes.
Right. And so with all of their practices is that we have time immemorial reference of this civilization that existed. Like, who fucking knows which narrative to believe in anymore? Like, Egypt could have been 10 million years ago. It could have been yesterday for all we fucking know. And we wouldn't know any better. However, time immemorial, these things have been here for so fucking long, and they were built so well to be exactly what it is that you were talking about, to represent what it was. Like, the very pyramids themselves were kind of like an effigy of expressing what they are trying to communicate to all of eternity, all of it. Like, not just us. In 10 billion years, aliens will land and they will look at those fucking things and they'll be like, oh, they understand biomechanical biogeometry, right? Yeah. But what's interesting now is that clip of My Dinner with Andre, where he's talking about the Orwellian nightmare, is that whereas previous cultures were overt in what it was that they used to inspire and control or whatever, like leave evidence of themselves, what we do today is the unseen hand on the horizon that good old Zane Grey talks about in If Nobody Reads Western Fiction, fucking read Zane Grey. Certainly Riders of the Purple Sage. The way that he describes like human trafficking, religious zealotry, standing up against states of power, women's rights, a lot of progressive ideas. And this guy was writing shit at the turn of the century back in the 1800s. But the most important thing he talks about is the corporate capture of human free will. And that's what the entire story of the Riders of the Purple Sage is about. It kind of sounds like sort of a fruity sort of a story, like, oh, the Riders of the Purple Sage, like, let me calibrate my crystals and fucking sing Kumbaya and drink my goddamn pumpkin spice latte or whatever. But that book is some of the most gangster shit. It is actually the first time, as near as I could tell, that they described a firearm spitting red. Like, he goes into a church and he shoots out the chandelier and knocks out all the candles. And the only thing that any of the parishioners that are the state, the control, whatever, all they see is his muzzle flash red. And so you hear that in a lot of song lyrics today, like Nas and Biggie Smalls and otherwise. But what we have today isn't a pyramid. It isn't something erected to address our gods or God or otherwise. Everything we do today is intentionally hiding itself from a God that we would rather believe is dead or that we openly disrespect, right? And so, whereas the Kemet had pyramids, or whoever the originators were, like you and I have said, is that we think that shit came out of like Guatemala or South America. Like, that's where that civilization started. Egypt was an afterthought of whoever it was that preceded them. Regardless, they actually had, in a lot of ways, the hubris or the pride to be able to think that they would erect something that their gods or God would witness. Hubris or pride or otherwise, like, that's sort of a beautiful concept, right? Like, thinking that it would be so well done that it could actually merit the witness of gods or God. Whereas what we do today, whereas they had pyramids, what we have today is what's called the panopticon. Are you familiar with the panopticon?
No.
Because it factors into that my dinner with Andre. And so the panopticon, man, I gotta fucking get me into some spelling bees or something. The panopticon is a type of institutional building and a system of control designed by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. The concept of the design is to allow all prisoners of an institution to be observed by a single security guard without the inmates being able to tell whether they are being watched. Although it's physically impossible for the single guard to observe all inmates' cell at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know that they are being watched means that they are motivated to act as though they are being watched at all times. And so there is geometry in the concept of a panopticon. Like if you look at the way the prisons are designed today, one of the foremost designing architectural structures that we develop today are prison systems. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the fact that like a lot of the modern prison system architecture was developed by a very severely autistic woman back in the 1800s. It is designed in a way to bifurcate and separate people, but then it also implies like the concept of the geometry of a panopticon as to where the idea is that a single guard can monitor all of the inmates, and there is no limit to the number of inmates that there could be there. Like that's a profound statement, right? Like geometrically, architecturally, it's a profound concept that you could only have one person that is able to observe any number of people. But the way the panopticon works is that it is designed in a way that all of the inmates, all of those interned will always behave as though they are being observed because they don't know when they are. It is almost the perfect opposite, like whereas you have the pyramid, the terrestrial pyramid, the panopticon is the other way down.
So, I guess going back to the pyramid, is that all pyramids that we've built in modern ages are falling apart and constantly need new renovation. And we can't figure out what ancient peoples did. But the way that the Egyptians did it, and I think the Mayans did it exactly the same way, same with the Aztecs. I mean, don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure they did, is you have the Great Pyramids, all three right next to each other. The way we would do this in modern times is we would level the whole ground and we would build the bases of the structures and then we would build them up. Well, the way that the Egyptians did it is they built each foundational base of the pyramids at different elevations, and yet we're still able to make them perfect to match the energies of the earth. And so they used the earth's radiation lines to mark the borders for the pyramid and to mark the rooms within the pyramid. So, I mean, they're using ways that we can't even fucking fathom, and our pyramids are falling apart. I mean, look at our modern buildings, right? Yeah, we make them to where they sway with the wind. We design them to withstand hurricanes. We try to make them go under so that when the water type tsunamis are hitting it, they can get covered. All these different things we're trying to do, but look at these objects that ancient peoples created, the primitive people, the first ones, that they're far beyond our comprehension and they've withstood the test of time. I mean, look at Chernobyl, for example, right? Something that happened in our modern age, and look at it now. Nature completely took it over, and you can't even tell people were there before. I mean, it's
how many times do you think it took people in antiquity to create an Ark of the Covenant, right? Like, don't you suppose they got it in one? And yet the Ark of the Covenant seems to be talking about like a radioactive isotope or whatever that is like blasting people's fucking skin off their faces or whatever. Like if you mistreat it and you don't understand the law and the rule of God or whatever. But it seems that there was no test trial for building these pyramids or ziggurats or the Ark of the Covenant, whereas everything about our culture is a fucking test trial. Like Chernobyl, like you were saying, is that yeah, it supplied energy to the Soviets for a little bit, and then that thing went up like in a not good way. And probably maybe they did make errors. But what I'm thinking is that when you talk about is that they were capable of things that we could never even possibly conceive of, I have always felt my entire life that therein lies the problem, is that we try to conceive too much, whereas they, if we're talking about such an ancient civilization, then the progenitors of Egypt, like the true Kemet, the true people that built the pyramids or the ziggurats or otherwise, is that I think that they were so saturated in existence and reality and observing their theology, their theocracy, their whatever, that they couldn't ignore it, right? Like, we will never have any idea who it was that invented the horoscope type of a thing. Like, and maybe even the Kemet or the Mayan priests or whatever, the Mayan architects, they themselves maybe didn't understand why it was that they built buildings the way that they did. It's just that it was what they had on hand, and they built it in a way that the only way that they could, because they didn't know anything else than the different processions and cycles and energies within nature. It had to have been a long time. Like, the way that our narrative goes today is that we basically were monkeys. We came out of the trees, we ate mushrooms, and then bam, iPads, right? But like, there had to have been a long fucking time of like terrestrial hominid people that really began to, it wasn't a question of us searching. It wasn't a question of us like conceptualizing. It was the fact that these things were in our face and just like beating us against the nose all day, every day, to where you couldn't ignore it. And then that echoed itself into everything we did after. And I think that that's everything that's wrong with civilization, and why it is that we devolve every next generation, every next cycle, every next eon, every next era, every next empire, is because we are further and further conceptualizing ourselves away from what is right in front of us.
So, I mean, according to Rudolf Steiner, we were meant to forget so that we can have ages of awakening again. And, I mean, I want to touch on, oh, fuck. So, okay, so with that, yes, Rudolf Steiner says that. And, I mean, we do forget a lot, but I feel like a lot of it has to do with our perspective, again, mentalism, because we're looking at things, and depending on where you're from, you either have a 2-point perspective, a 3-point perspective, 5-point perspective. But again, Rudolf Steiner said the only true way to perceive something in its essence is a 12-point perspective, which is why you have the Messiah with 12 disciples, which is why you have the 12 zodiac. These were meant to give us perspective from 12 viewpoints. Like I told you, the cube, which is proof of the third dimension. It's a material manifested is a cube, and it has 12 lines, right? So, and you're looking at this object in 3 dimension, just as what I'm referring to with the 12-point perspective, because, you know, I really have to agree with this. So as you were talking about it, I started thinking, man, what if somebody really delved into like the 12 great philosophies of history, the 12 great religions, the 12 great cultures? Imagine what kind of secrets we would find out of that 12-point perspective.
Imagine how much they share in common.
And it's what I've been saying the whole time in this podcast, where we're given fragments, bite-sized chunks out of each of these cultures and religions. That's why I say you can't say any of them are wrong, but you can't say any of them are right either, because each of them contain that piece that is right.
And that is also true of people. So anybody watching, listening, or otherwise, like, it's getting fucking deep out there. However, like, you go in your own way, and you are a fragment, a fraction, a parcel, tessellation of all of this. So when you were talking about the cube, it's kind of interesting because we've talked about architecture before, is that we live in like cubicle domiciles and everything, is that, to me, the number 12 isn't important in terms of a cube. Well, it is important in terms of a cube. I guess what I'm saying is that the cube shouldn't be important, is that we maybe could, or I maybe, because I'm an asshole, I could maybe make the argument that there are 2 different types of belief systems. And that breaks down between 3s and 4s, right? So with the indigenous population of the Western Hemisphere, it was very much observation of the rule of fours, right? Like 4 seasons, 4 directions, 4 stages of life. Everything broke down to fours. But then you get into, I think, largely like ancient Asiatic principles, is that it is in the rule of threes, because three is it is the strongest. It is the ultimate, or you also see it realized in the Holy Trinity, right? And so what is important about the process of 12 as to why we work time, our concept of time, which is really just like something that everybody agrees on but doesn't actually have any either here nor there, like time don't give a fuck, but we break it down in rules of 12s. 12
like
on the clock, 12 on the clock, fucking 12 months, 12 zodiac or whatever, is that you get to incorporate the both. Is that you have 4 decisive factors and then 3 which incorporate into either one of those, right? And so that's why 12 is also like a very relevant number. But at the same time, I'm getting old. And so basically I'm like, no, I'm not getting old. It's time that's the liar. I'm fine, you know? And I'm just trying to work my way out of that fucking paper bag. But
I guess the reason why I used the cube as the reference, I know there's many objects we could use to portray 3 dimensions. Right?
well, you're not wrong. Like I didn't mean to besmirch what it was you were saying, is that it was just interesting the way you said it, is that we have a very cubical kind of a perception in terms of the, like we have said before, is that we live in cubicle domiciles. We work in cubicles, and there's doesn't really make any sense.
Well, I mean, it was intentional. I said a cube because not only does a cube illustrate 3 dimension with 12 perspective, a 12-point perspective, right? It also is the easiest way in our reality to draw and illustrate 0 dimension, 1st dimension, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th dimension. You know, the way that we can illustrate it with the cube, because you draw the cube and first, I mean, because 0 dimension is 1 point, because without a coordinate, without 2 points to create a coordinate, there's no dimension. So when you get 2 points, then you got length. And then so you double that, and now you got length and height. You double that, and now you have a cube with length, height, width. Okay, so now you take that 12, you're doubling it, that's 24. Okay, so that, and you connect all the lines just like you would on a cube if it was just 3-dimensional. Really hard to illustrate, I mean, with my hands, but you do it again with the 5th dimension and you double it. And so you can actually physically illustrate in geometry how it would be perceived in our perspective. Okay.
Don't you feel that the 5th dimension, the way that you just described it, something about that really resonated with me, as to it always harkens back to, I'm a fucking broken record, about Aristotle saying that the sum is greater than the whole of its components. But I feel like the 5th dimension are relationships, right? Like it is taking what is within the cube, within the, you know, the box and everything, and then you have 2 components within the 3rd dimension, within the cube. But once they begin to interact, well, children, love, experience, happenstance, whatever. Like I feel like this is why it's something that our culture absolutely fucking hates, is that nobody is going to college for a philosophy degree anymore. But I feel like that's what certainly the Greeks were absolutely doing, is that what they were doing was building a relationship across time immemorial in a way, and just saying like the sum is greater than the whole of its components. Maybe like the Bible says, go forth and multiply. Like I feel very much as though, what would you define the 5th dimension as? Because I guess that I just fell in love with the 5th element fucking you know, that movie where they're saying like, oh, the fifth element is love, that is the philosopher's stone or whatever. But it honestly speaks to within the cube, within the third dimension, and everybody incorporated in the third dimension. The fourth dimension is time, right?
And space, because
Time,
Einstein proved that they're connected. So it's
so you have a cube
ST
or a rhombus or a rectangle, like say this pack of cigarettes or whatever, or what the Schrodinger's cat in the box, right? Is that you have the dimensionality. You have, like you were explaining perfectly, the single dimension between A and B. And then you have the second dimension where it is what incorporates between the two. And then you round that into the cube. I can't make a cube with my fucking hands or whatever. Like you put your hands together, it looks like a fucking brain. And so within that, what fills the volume of the capacity of the third dimension is the fourth dimension, which is time and space, right? So the fifth dimension is what occurs within there. And to me, that I think is like relationships, friendships, fucking, whatever.
Because all of that stuff is contained within the third dimension, which is the reality. I mean, fourth dimension, I know it gets crazy because we exist in this physical realm. So what we interact with in the physical. So going to biogeometry, each cross section of these energetic lines are what you're describing in our relationships, our emotion, all of these different aspects of what it means to be physical. It even has to do with physical, spiritual. Each cross sect has to do with something. So dependent on how a vibration hits you, what angle, what perspective it's coming from, could resonate with you in a different way. It could make you feel a different way. It can make you okay, so for instance, they have these things that are called collision spots, and they're well aware of them, and they go across ley lines. And so when you drive over it, what happens?
Like a shock.
They've done tests on it. They've done CAT scans, and they could prove that it actually does something to the brain. So what happens is when you drive over the ley line,
like a collision spot sounds a lot like a chakra.
So they're the ley lines, but we built roads over these ley lines in negative ways because we're not using biogeometry to work with the energies of the earth. Instead, we're trying to go around them, but also not seeing them. And so when you lay on a ley line, they'll tell you this in feng shui or a mental dowser. If you go see one, that they plan out the energies in your home so that it best is maximized for you, right? But what they're doing is they're working around the energies. So what biogeometry does, and like what the Egyptians did, is they transmuted the energies in their area, even the negative ones, to work in a positive way with them as opposed to working around it. So I guess going back to I lost my train of thought.
Well, what if, and again, like this is the trap that we always set for ourselves, is that we're always saying is that they figured out how to harness this energy, like they were witness to this energy, but what if it's more of a question of that they just couldn't ignore it?
So, I mean, according to them, according to the Cometians, Thoth gave them all that information, right? Tehute or Jehute. So Jehute came after. His name is Tehute, right? With a T pronounced.
I'm gonna have to play that fucking video game again. You keep bringing up Jehudi, and it's like, I want to play that game. God damn it.
But so they said he gave them that knowledge, so that's where they're saying they got it from. But going back to the collision spots, when they test the brain waves of going over certain frequencies, right? Because there's not all the energies coming from the earth are negative, but it does have negative ley lines. And these lines that contain radiation, ants, termites, things of that nature, they like to build on these lines because they like the radiation. So if you see a line of ant hills, that is a radiation line of the earth. Now, when you drive over these collision spots on the highways or roads that they call collision spots, when you go through it, your brain literally scrambles. So that's why people might fucking turn or do something stupid that they wouldn't otherwise do consciously. And they end up wrecking, hitting another car, rolling over, whatever it is. But the brain was scrambled for that moment going through that line. So they have also proven through feng shui and stuff, if you're sleeping on these lines, you'll start to get sick or you'll develop a bulge in you that it causes cancer. Even plants.
Everything that we have, like I was making the point earlier, is to, the Finnish have 32 different words for snow, and we just have 32 different words of like emotional upset. And everybody's thinking like, oh, it's all in here. Like it's something wrong with you have a chemical imbalance, which I pulled up previously on a podcast saying that the whole chemical imbalance narrative was just a sales point. Like that shit was completely fucking made up. And anyways, when I was a kid and I was watching everybody get doped up around me, I was like, well, okay, so you're saying you have a chemical imbalance in your fucking brain and you have to take this substance. Hopefully you eat it and not shove it up your ass, although there are suppositories as well. But it's like, look, like I'm a first grader, and the first thing they taught us in basic chemistry was the idea that behind every chemical reaction is an energetic one. So you're going to just like put like a nice, comfy, cozy opiate waffle on top of your chemical problems and not address the energetic problem whatsoever. It all goes back to kind of factors into what we were talking about, where I wonder if the Egyptians, and what I had always heard is that they believed this to be their center of concept and stuff. Like, just think about that. Like as a mental experiment, consider that it isn't your brain that thinks. Like as I am speaking right now, I talk too quickly and I don't think about what the fuck I say. So apologies to everybody having to listen to my fucking diarrhea hurricane. But I do have a sensation in my head. However, if you were raised to believe that it all came from here, you might have a sensation that comes out of there as well, right? Like you would just trick yourself into it, or we trick ourselves into it. But when you talk about the mechanisms, like what you were saying is that the heart is 100% the ka, the body. It is. It's the ultimate realization. It's the architectural keystone. It is very, in a lot of ways, like our thumbprint. It is the way that our hair grows. I don't know if I could get it in the picture, but everybody that cuts my hair, they freak the fuck out because I have this shape in my hair that looks like the eye of Jupiter, and I don't know why that is. But if you look at the brain, you do this. Looks a good deal like a brain. The more wrinkly a brain, the more profound it is, the more successful it is, right? Like the more wrinkles you have in your brain, the more capacity you're able to course through it, right? So you could say that whereas the heart is the engine and the engineer, it's a very kind of like physically simple mechanism. Yeah. Whereas with the brain looks more like a transistor. Let me see if I have that right.
For instance, with the brain, going back to the whole center of your body. Okay, so the brain, if the brain is dead, we can keep your body alive on life support. That's been proven, right? But with the heart, if the heart's not there, the body won't survive. And if you're sitting in a lotus pose for meditation or anything, even in any kind of sitting pose, you base on your chakras. The heart is the middle of your chakras, essentially.
I didn't find the right word. Like I'm looking at transistors and capacitors, but there's another simple word. Maybe you could help me out. Is that when you're looking at like a substation for energy for your neighborhood or whatever, is it a
transformer?
It might be a transformer. Let me look at a transformer.
But when you're talking about the heart, dude, the toroidal field that I talk about that creates our like AT field, going back to Evangelion, or your aura, our bubble, it comes from out the front of the heart and out the back, creating the two tornadoes which touch each other and form our bubble.
So, and this is kind of the point that I'm trying to make as to, is it a case that these ancient civilizations were more conceptually profound than us, or is it just a case that they couldn't ignore what was in front of them? And this is the example that I'm going to give, and I hope that I do it right. Like I could see that it clearly has to go in one direction to make it make sense. But so with the brain, and actually it kind of was the transformer. That'll be a good enough of a placeholder. With a transformer, you have all of these appendages, you have all of these organisms that factor in. You've got the conservator tank, you got the breather, the low voltage bushes or whatever. But you could see, okay, so it maybe is a bad example, is that with the cooling tubes, the more effective they are, the more wrinkles you have, right? And so if somebody were to dig us up and they find one of these, they're like, oh, they were conceptual enough to make it look like the human brain. The more wrinkles you have, the more effective you are, right? But that's just not the case. Is that what we're actually looking at is that it was the brain that conceptualized that thing in the first place, and it just had to match the biogeometry. That's it. Like, we didn't do it intentionally to say, like, well, there are wrinkles in the brain. The more wrinkles in the brain, the more efficient, the more neurons that are able to course and pass through or whatever.
So actually, we did do it in a 2-point perspective. And again, this is such a broad subject, and I'm not an expert on it. So, of course, I'm going to leave things out. So until the Russians created, and I can't remember what his name is, who created the periodic table. So in order to measure things, we needed to measure matter. What is matter? What is it broken up into? So until we had the periodic table, we didn't have a foundation for what physical matter was. And then we did. And then the French created the 12 vibrational spectrum. But then there's many sub-vibrations within that vibrational spectrum that they've discovered. But with that 12 vibrational spectrum, we discovered energies and how to harness them, what colors are, and things of that nature. So what they do is you take the periodic table and what elements make up a subject. Then you go to the vibration that resonates with those materials. And this is how they develop things like our cell phone and stuff. Every component in your television, your lights, your phone, it has to have this 2-part where they take the element and they resonate the vibration to it to activate it. So it's the same with the crystals. I kind of wanted to bring that up because if you want to activate your crystals, they're activated through vibration and frequency. So this weekend I charged them and I set them out. I laid them all out so that the sun could hit them equally. And periodically I would go and I would turn them over so they can get the sunlight. But while I was doing this, I played around with it. So I took my speaker. I have this big speaker like this. And
how does that sound? Like, how long does it hold a charge? I need a new speaker.
Oh, dude, I got that at Family Dollar, believe it or not, for $20, and it freaking holds a charge. I only listen to it when I'm in the shower. Sometimes I'll listen to it for 30 to 45 minutes at a time, and daily. And this thing lasts 5 to 7 days. Just depends on how much I use it. That I have to charge it only once a week.
I got to get me one of those. Sorry, go ahead.
But anyway, so I use that. I put on the God frequency, okay, 963 hertz. And I use that to charge my stones because I figured, well, if I'm going to apply a frequency to them to activate them, what better frequency than the God frequency? Now, obviously, you can use different frequencies for different things. You know, you have 432, 528, 741. All of these are healing energies.
It is 52 hertz that occurs in a waterfall. Like when you hear a river flowing or a waterfall, like that occurs in 52 hertz, I believe. As to why they call it God.
Right, because cats purr between 20 and 50 hertz.
Cats too.
Why they don't get cancers in their organs. Anything closest to their throat doesn't usually get cancers. If they do get cancers or diseases, it's usually in their extremities farthest from their throat.
Did you know that raccoons purr?
Oh yeah,
raccoons
ferrets
purr
and
like
stuff.
Cats. I never knew that before. I heard I thought it was a cat purring, and I go outside for a cigarette the other night, and it's a fucking I was like, that doesn't.
Dude, it might be the reason why they're immune to fucking rabies, or why they could be carriers but not go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mean, I charged them though, and I played around with putting it on each side of the stones, kind of like oscillating it.
At least you do that with crystals, right? Like, at least you do that with crystals. You want to know what I do that kind of practice with? my fucking stuffed animal pillow. Like, I always feel guilty. I was like, oh, hey, Beauregard, like, you'll support my head. And you, like, he's got a zipper in his back, which has blankets inside. And it's just like, like, I'm fucking 38 years old and I need a pillow. So I might as well get one that's like shaped like a fucking adorable animal or whatever. But I actually will. It's like, oh, well, I feel guilty that I'm going outside and I'm just going to leave Beauregard in the window. I do the same fucking thing with my houseplants. I've had this one houseplant. I've never been able to raise houseplants before, but I've had this one particular houseplant since like a year before COVID, throughout the whole thing, moved it to Tennessee and back, and it's still kicking ass. It's a basic spider plant. It's an easy plant to raise. But yeah, like, why wouldn't you understand that, like, me as a sculptor and just making like dinky little whatever kind of like crystalline looking objects and stuff, is that as a sculptor you understand the impression that you leave on material, right? But the difference with crystallization is that these things are so fucking ancient. It sort of does tie into you talking about old Russian boy that invented the periodic table of charts, is that it's really just a guideline. And this is the problem with science today, is that they're like, well, you have to trust the science because we know what argon is, or we know what titanium is, or we know what fucking neon is. Like, but it's like, you could operate within the parameters of using that language, but you miss the plot when you have to understand that these are really just the ways that we understand material existence, in which regard it is very much magic. It's just that science is like the I can't believe it's not butter of magic.
Fuck, so I can't remember if it was Charles Dickens or who, but it's another writer. I think it was Charles Dickens who said that what he didn't like about the word magic is that what magic is what we lump everything into that we don't understand, that we can't explain. It's science or things happening in front of our eyes that we just can't perceive or comprehend, technologies, whatever, that we just associate to magic, to lump it up for something that is unexplainable, something we give no credence to, we don't want to study into, so we just call it magic, just to basically ignore it.
Which, full circle, again, is that I pulled up the images earlier, is that you gave me that alien graphic with your face on it, and there is absolutely no fucking way, dude, that that thing could alter itself with other images that I applied to it, because like you gave that fucking thing to me 3 years ago, and then you messaged it to me off of your app. I downloaded it. It should not have the capacity to be able to change itself. And then not only did I download it, but I altered it in a completely different app. And then months after the fact, I apply something to it and the fucking thing changes. Like, there's something else going on here. And obviously, like, yeah, when you're talking about the fact that the conversation that you and I are having right now is that we're looking at what pieces of glass, pieces of obsidian, and we're having a conversation that could potentially be shared to tens of millions of people. Tell me that isn't magic. Like, let me show you an example of magic right here. And this is actually something that I experienced. It's a video. I totally forgot about it. I about had a stroke when I experienced it myself, but Colorado has the most 14ers, and we also have like the highest consistent elevation of any of the other states, Alaska, Hawaii, like not just the lower 48, but all of America. We have the highest elevation consistently. And so Mount Massive is one of my favorites. And I didn't even remember this event because I experienced it, but nobody else, for whatever reason, like different heights, different body build or whatever. It was this particular time of day that this phenomena happened. Let me pull it up here. Kemet. There we go. This is a regular phenomena that happens at high elevation, and it happened to me, and it was so magical that, of course, the last thing you're going to do is share that experience with anybody else, because they're going to be like, yeah, that sounds like you're a fucking crystal wearing hippie, like woo, like whatever. But it was so much that I was pointing at my friends and I was like, do you guys see this? And they didn't see it because it only had to be exactly where I was standing. And I could see myself move in and out of this phenomena, but they couldn't see it because it only happens to the viewer. And so I saw this thing that was actually captured on camera recently on Instagram, and I was like, holy fuck, like, that's the one thing that I didn't want to bring up with anybody because it would make me sound like a fucking goofball. Let me pull it up here. So this is what's called a Brocken specter. And yet, as you could see, you could almost intuitively understand that it is a phenomena of, you could see the silhouette of the person moving that is projected on the atmosphere itself as a medium. Right?
Yeah.
But it's very specific as to whoever it is that's standing in just exactly that spot. You're muted. There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think you gotta help carry in groceries.
Well, I mean, that's what it all comes down to, right? Like, we all got to carry our own load. I just carried like 80 pounds of groceries on my goddamn back. Like, full disclosure for any of the listeners, I don't drive. I ain't got a car. Just don't see any reason to spend that money. And so I carry 80 pounds of groceries on my goddamn back before we did this podcast. So now I'm going to make myself some fucking food, get drunk, watch a lot of anime, and then go to sleep.
Fuck.
But yeah, we'll
All
leave
right.
it there.
All right. Bye, guys.
Adios, my dude.
Later.
Have a good night. Love y'all.